I'm sure you probably heard the news out of Pittsburgh that the guy who committed the atrocities in the Tree of Life massacre was in fact today found guilty. He is now going forward and will be facing the death penalty. And initially I was, to be honest with you, thinking to give a sermon on Father's Day. After all, that's this weekend, or Juneteenth, after all, again, something that's observed. And yet, the idea of having not necessarily a sermon where I'm sharing with you my thoughts in terms of my opinion, but expressing with you a few salient thought points of what is the Jewish perspective on the death penalty, I thought a little bit more, well, in line with current events. So I'm curious, how many of you have any ideas? Are we for the death penalty as a Jewish people? No, that is correct. We are not. In fact, in 1959, the CCAR came out with a statement that said no to the death penalty. And as to why, you may ask, did the CCAR choose to formally reject the death penalty? At the time, the Union for American Hebrew Congregations resolved that in the light of modern scientific knowledge and concepts of humanity, the resort to or continuation of capital punishment either by a state or national government is no longer morally justifiable. The resolution goes on to say the death penalty lies as a stain upon civilization and our religious consciousness. In 1979, the CCAR, the rabbinic professional wing of the Reform movement, continued that same thought. Both in concept and in practice, Jewish tradition found capital punishment repugnant, and there is no pervasive evidence that capital punishment does serve as a deterrent to crime. In fact, the only individuals that I'm aware of that was ever executed by the state of Israel was Ada Eichmann, who was executed on May 31st, 1962. But what of the guy who I don't believe in naming right now? What do we do with him? Is it something that we're supportive of? After all, we do learn in the book of Genesis that whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood also be shed, for in God's image was man made. And in fact, interestingly enough, there is a saying of what to do when we know of somebody who commits murder of somebody because there's Jewish. It's a Hebrew saying, of course. That Hashem yakom damam, may God avenge their blood. So we have this idea of revenge happening, or vengefulness happening, or some sort of justice happening. And the truth is that for many people who lived through the massacre in Pittsburgh, they went on to deal with significant trauma. Not just the people who were in the synagogue, but even the people around. And in some cases, we as a Jewish community, after going through that, were forever changed. It was the largest massacre that we experienced in this country. And we know what can happen, though, when people get really foamed up, I guess, for justice. We know what could go wrong. Something went very wrong in Atlanta, Georgia, with a man named Leo Frank. And so I think we really need to contemplate, what does it mean to go for justice? I'm not telling you that I have the answer, because the truth is I don't. When we do struggle with the phrase eye for eye, I'm not sure if you've heard of that one. It's also found in the Bible, in fact, a few different times. But the rabbis went on, just so that you're aware, to limit when capital punishment could really be applied. They even had conversations of what retribution could look like. And they decided that eye for eye was really pertaining to monetary compensation for damages. Deuteronomy 21 does dictate that a rebellious son who does not listen to the voice of his mother or father receive the death penalty. Well, the rabbis went on to say that that's also a no-go in the 1st and 2nd centuries, and they decided to go out of their way to emphasize that we're not supposed to take that passage literally. Rather, in order for both the father and mother, they had to be the exact same height. There had to be all of these conditions that were to be met. And then they went on to conclude, after making a whole list, that there's never been a stubborn or rebellious son, nor will there ever be one who deserves that in the future. They couched it in this unbelievable way. They did mental gymnastics. After the year 70, the idea that the Sanhedrin, the big rabbinic court, if they found somebody to be guilty and to be worthy of the death penalty, and I think it was like more than one generation, and they too were supposed to be understood as a group of people that were murderous in their own right. So while certainly we read in the book of Ecclesiastes there is a time to kill and a time to heal, I think in effect Judaism promotes healing above anything and everything else. After all, the idea that we need to continue and perpetuate violence doesn't help. Furthermore, if we were to talk to death penalty advocates, we would learn of all of the fallacies in the system. Not that, again, I'm here today to have that conversation, but we just want to be sure. So, in essence, well, the thrust of Jewish tradition and historical positions of the Reform movement, we need to impel us to really consider capital punishment, not as in we must do it, but to really understand when it's appropriate in the most limited, extremely limited circumstances. When will it give people a sense of relief? And I'm not saying that it will in Pittsburgh. I think there, again, the emphasis needs to be on healing. But I think also the conversation needs to be around how do we prevent those things from happening in the future? Those things meaning the Pittsburgh Massacre. Shabbat Shalom.